So we're going to start our assembly with a game, and this is a word game. I'm going to show you some pictures and you've got to try and guess what word these pictures describe. So for example, here is the first picture. Hopefully you got that one. You can see it's foghorn. Right, have a look at the next picture. So there you've got a rain and a bow, which of course makes rainbow. Have a look at this one, see what word you get from this. So you put the hot and the dog together and of course you get a hot dog. What about this one? What word can you make from this picture? I think that's my favourite. That of course is a hole in one. What about this picture? Have a look at it and see what word you can guess from this. I reckon you're becoming experts at this now, and you would have got moonlights. One more picture, and this picture will link to the story we're going today. So have a look at this picture and see what word you can guess from this. So that Red Sea of course refers to the Red Sea that Moses and his friends are going to cross in our story today. But before we get to that part of the story, we need to go right back to the beginning, where Moses and all the Israelites were slaves in Egypt. Moses' family had been in Egypt for hundreds of years, ever since the time of Jacob and Joseph. Joseph, if you remember, was the person who was sold as a slave by his brothers into Egypt, but worked hard and became one of the assistants to Pharaoh. He was the guy who had those strange dreams and also helped Pharaoh understand what his dreams meant. And he became a very important person in Egypt. And his whole family came to live with him. The problem was the Israelites increased in number, and the more and more of them that came into existence, the more scared Pharaoh got that one day there would be too many Israelites and they would take over Egypt. So Pharaoh came up with a horrible plan. He decided he was going to get rid of new baby boys. He was just going to have them taken away, and therefore the Israelites wouldn't continue to grow at the rate they were. So that's what he did. He ordered that this would happen. Now Moses' mom obviously wanted to look after her baby, and when he got to the stage where he was making too much noise to be kept safely at home, she decided to try and hide him. When the soldiers came looking, she put him in a basket and put him in the river Nile, in the bulrushes, hoping that he would be missed by the soldiers and she could look after him. Now it so happened that the Pharaoh's daughter, the princess, was using the river Nile to wash. That's what they did in those days. And she spotted this basket and went over to have a look. I guess she was really surprised when she saw a baby in it. I think she realised straight away that this was one of those Israelite babies that her father was trying to get rid of. But she didn't agree with that. She decided she was going to take that baby home and look after him and bring him up in the palace. It so happened that also that Moses' sister was watching over the basket. Moses' mom had sent her to do this. And when she saw the princess take the baby, she ran up and said, "Can I get someone to help you with that baby? Can I get someone to come and be a nurse?" And the princess thought that was a good idea. And so Moses' mom was hired as the baby's nurse. Moses' mom ended up helping to bring up Moses. And he grew up, well, in luxury really, compared to lots of the Israelites who by now were slaves. It was those people who were building the pyramids, and they were worked really hard by the Egyptians. They had to do lots of heavy lifting, and if they didn't work properly, they even got whipped. And Moses grew up in the midst of this, but not really knowing what was going on. But Moses was to learn of his upbringing. He was to learn what was happening to his people. And of course this started to make him really angry. He wanted to find a way to help his people. And one day when he saw one of the Israelites being beaten for not working hard enough, he intervened and pushed the soldier away. But in doing so, he actually killed the soldier. I'm not sure that Moses meant to do this, but that's what happened. He knew he was in serious trouble, so he ran away. He ran away into the desert, where he was to live for quite a long time. He even met his wife there. But one day, while he was in the desert looking after sheep, there was a bush, and the bush looked like it was on fire, but it wasn't really burning up. And as Moses investigated, he heard a voice coming out of the middle of the bush. And he knew at once God was talking. And God was saying, Moses, I need you to go back to Egypt, to go to the Pharaoh and to say, let my people go. Moses was terrified. He didn't want to do this. He knew that as soon as he went into Egypt, he could probably be in serious trouble for what he'd done. Anyway, no one would go and face the Pharaoh and demand that they let the people go. But God said, I will be with you, and I'll even do some signs to show that I'm in this situation. If Pharaoh won't let your people go, there's going to be some plagues, 10 plagues, and eventually he will let you go. Moses was very nervous about doing this, but he trusted God, and together with his brother Aaron went to face Pharaoh. Pharaoh's first reaction was to laugh. How dare you come before me and say these things, he said. And then it was a bit of anger. Who does your God think he is? I'm the only God around here. Then the strange things started happening. One day, all of Egypt woke up and there were frogs everywhere. Their beds were full of frogs, the land was full of frogs. There were even frogs in the cupboards where the food was kept. Frogs all over the place. And when the frogs had gone, suddenly a whole group of locusts appeared. Locusts everywhere, swarms of them flying all over the place, getting everywhere. It was pretty scary actually, these big insects buzzing all over the place. And once they'd gone, there were more plagues as well. The river turned into blood, there were flies in the land, there were hailstones the size of golf balls. The plagues came, and every time Moses went back to Pharaoh and said, let my people go. And every time Pharaoh refused. After all, these were the people who were his slaves. If they didn't stay and do this work, who would build the pyramids? But Pharaoh was getting a bit worn down. He was very nearly at the stage where he would let them go. In fact, sometimes he said he would, and then changed his mind. What finally persuaded him was the 10th plague, when the firstborn sons of the Egyptians died in the night. It's a bit like what Pharaoh had done to the firstborn of the Israelites all those years ago. And Pharaoh said, go, leave this country. I don't want to see you anymore. So Moses and his people gathered up quickly all their possessions because they knew that Pharaoh might change his mind, and set off to a new land, a new home. Moses had been right to rush though, because Pharaoh did change his mind. He was so furious about what had happened, he decided he was going to send his soldiers and get rid of the Israelites for good. And so can you imagine the scene? Moses and all his friends, there would have been many, many thousands of them with children and animals and all the possessions they could carry, were heading off towards the desert. That was the only way out of Egypt. And Pharaoh had sent his soldiers to chase after them. Problem was the Red Sea. Remember in that game, that was one of the clues you had to solve. And the Red Sea was blocking the path of Moses and all his friends. And of course they couldn't just swim across the sea. It was too big and too deep, and lots of the people couldn't swim, and they had all the animals and children as well. And they couldn't go round it because they knew the soldiers would just catch them. They didn't know what to do. They started to get quite angry with Moses actually. But Moses said, well, God has led us this far. We just need to trust him. And Moses did what God told him to do. He lifted his stick. I guess the people were saying, Moses, what are you doing? This isn't a time for just standing here. We've got to do something before the Egyptians get to us. But as he lifted his stick, something very strange happened. I reckon many of you know what happened next. but the sea started to split in half. It started to separate. You had a wall of water on the left, a wall of water on the right, but a dry passageway all through the middle. And Moses and his friends walked right through the centre of the Red Sea. I guess it was pretty scary for them with this wall of water on each side, but that's what they did. And then, as they reached the other side, Moses dropped his hands down and the water poured back, and so the Red Sea was whole again, and the Egyptians weren't able to follow them. Moses and his friends had reached safety. They'd reached the desert, and from there they would make their way to find a new land. But that's another story. We'll do that next time, how Moses and his friends found a new place to live. Thanks very much for listening, and hope you're keeping well, and see you soon.